One day I was walking around the Spectator Village and I looked up and I couldn't believe what I saw. The Bobby Jones story through Emory University. Growing up in Atlanta, my favorite golfer is Bobby Jones. Bobby Jones never turned pro. He remained an amateur and he won every major golf tournament there was. His story is amazing. We met the curator, his name is Randy, and I'd like to introduce him to you, and he can share with you the story of one Bobby Jones.
Randy Gue. I'm the curator of modern political and historical collections at Emory University's Manuscript Archives and Rare Book Library in Atlanta, Georgia. I became a historian and a curator for a very specific reason. I grew up in Atlanta and no one talked about the city's past when I was growing up. We all knew about the Civil War, but other than that, we didn't know anything about it. So I'm convinced my entire career, I'm old enough that I remember the old city and I remember seeing the old city, but my entire career is taking those puzzle pieces from my childhood and trying to figure out the context, what I saw, what it meant, and how it affects the city today. So it took me a long while to find it because, right, I knew you could study cities, but I thought you had to study places like Paris, Tokyo, New York City. It never occurred to me that anyone would be allowed to or be interested in studying a place like Atlanta.
And your hometown.
In my hometown, and I ended up taking a course that I didn't want to take, and it was about Atlanta, and just the light bulb clicked on like that. I was like, this is what I'm interested, this is what I'm here to do. Welcome to Bobby Jones, The Game of Life, presented by Emory University at the Open Championship in St. Andrews, Scotland. We're here today because we're trying to tell the story about Mr. Jones, who was an Atlanta businessman, attorney, and also a golfer. One of the greatest amateur golfers of all time. This is Bob Jones at age 13 when he won the Druid Hills Club Championship. This is the man he defeated, Archer Davidson. One of the really hard things to know when you're looking at historic images is to figure out how talented people really were, because you don't really have a measure. This photograph taught me how talented Bob Jones was. Bob Jones was 13. He was literally a boy who defeated men. That is how talented he was. Archer Davidson was a very good golfer, and he had decades more experience playing golf, and more importantly, playing competitive golf. Bob Jones said there were two kinds of golf: golf and championship golf. And Jones was so talented that he could defeat men who were twice his age. And we actually have the photograph, and the photograph comes from Mr. Jones in his scrapbook. At the bottom, in his boyhood handwriting, underneath Jones, it says champion, and underneath Archer Davidson, it says runner-up.
Oh, wow.
So in 1930, Jones became the first golfer to win all four of the major tournaments of his time period in 1 year. And it became known as the Grand Slam, or the impregnable quadrilateral. These days, folks talk about the modern Grand Slam, but they talk about career Grand Slams. No one has ever come close besides Ben Hogan and this year Jordan Spieth with the possibility of winning the four major tournaments of their time period. Jones was the first and the only one. He came over here, and in St. Andrews, he won the British Amateur Championship. Then he went to Hoylake and won the British Open, and then went to Interlaken in Minnesota, made a 40-foot putt on the 18th green in the last round to win the U.S. Open, and then won the U.S. Amateur Championship in Marion to complete the Grand Slam. After Jones retired from competitive golf, he and Robert W. Woodruff, the head of the Coca-Cola company, were traveling to Berlin in 1936 to go to the Olympics. They stopped in Scotland, and after playing Glen Eagles, they said, why don't we go and play the old course? So Jones phoned up, asked for a tee time. It simply said Robert Jones, Atlanta, Georgia. They drove down here, got here that day, and it turned out the entire town came to see Jones play a round. Mr. Woodruff took one look at the crowd and said, I'm not playing today, have fun. Yeah. But literally the entire town turned out. They closed the stores, they put signs in the doors that said Bobby's back. And so it just shows the incredible relationship he had with this town. In 1958, there was the inaugural Eisenhower Cup. Bob Jones was made the captain of the team. When he was here, this was his last visit, St. Andrews awarded him the freedom of the city of St. Andrews and the borough. The only other American to receive that honor was Ben Franklin when he was ambassador to France in the 1780s. At this time, Mr. Jones had a terrible spinal condition called syringomyelia. He couldn't walk unassisted. When the provost brought him the freedom of the city, Jones sprang to his feet and took his first unaided steps in 10 years and walked to the podium, gave his remarks, and walked back to the seat. It was just a measure of how important the moment and the award were to him.
I could take out of my life everything except my experiences at St. Andrews, and I still have a rich, full life.
And he sent Mr. Woodruff, who was here with him in 1936, a postcard, the Royal and Ancient with the 18th green, and it says, "This time topped even the last," and the last was 1936. I wish for both of you at the Freedom Ceremony. So it's a very nice, and you can also tell with his handwriting, you can tell that his spinal condition is starting to affect his handwriting, but that it was still important enough for him to handwrite a message to Mr. and Mrs. Woodruff. But first and foremost, y'all might have heard of a country club he helped develop called Augusta National. They have a tournament there called the Masters. You might have heard of it. So they picked the absolute worst time to create a golf course. It was in the depths of the Depression. And what people don't know is that Augusta National struggled mightily for the first decade of its existence. In 1934, in order to help publicize the club, they had the first annual Augusta National Invitational Tournament. Today it's known as the Masters. Jones initially refused to call it the Masters because he thought the title was too pretentious, but eventually everyone else was using it, so he agreed to call it the Masters. And he actually played in the Masters tournament to help publicize it. People know Jones because of his golf achievements, but one of the spectacular things is that, as our exhibit is, the game of life, Jones took the lessons that he learned from a very young age at the golf course and applied it to his life. He had a degree in mechanical engineering from Georgia Tech, a degree in literature from Harvard University, and then he went to Emory University and went to law school there. In 1926, he became the first golfer ever to win the double, which was the US Open and the British Open. 3 months later, he enrolled in law school. That's a little hard to comprehend these days for a professional athlete to do something like that.
Sure is. And he passed it, I think, his first year. Passed the bar.
Bobby Jones did not graduate from Emory, even though he went there for law school. After his third or fourth quarter, he took the bar exam to see how difficult it was, and he passed it. So he didn't have to go back and complete his degree. He went to work for his father's law firm. Part of this exhibit is that it's not stuck in time. Mr. Jones' legacy is still with us. Emory University has a Robert T. Jones Jr. program, and it's an exchange program with the University of St. Andrews.